I'm Larry Elliot. I'm the economics editor of The Guardian. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this session with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He's the director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University. I don't really think I need to do that much by way of introduction. Jeffrey's been a big figure in macroeconomics for the best part of 30 years. He's advised many governments, including those of Bolivia, Russia after the fall of communism. He's an advisor to Ban Ki-moon. He's worked on development issues and debt issues for many, many years. And I did think that when this session was taking place, that we might be in the presence of the next president of the World Bank, because Jeffrey put his hat in the ring for that. But that wasn't to be. Jeffrey, explain why you thought about putting yourself forward as a candidate, and why you've decided now to not be thrown.
Well, I was hoping we'd be talking in those terms, yeah. But was not to be. But I'm absolutely delighted with the candidate that President Obama nominated yesterday, whose name is Jim Kim. He's the president of Dartmouth and a great public health leader, really world-class world leader. A month ago, I decided when Bob Zoellick, the current president, announced that he was stepping down, and I saw the list of names that were being considered, I basically said, not again. We've had 11 World Bank presidents. They've all been American. That is an unwritten tradition, as everybody knows, of IMF, World Bank. But more than that, all 11 have been bankers or political insiders. And this is no good, because the World Bank is basically not a bank, first of all. It's a development institution, and it needs professional leadership. It needs the leadership of somebody who deals in the fight against poverty, hunger, and disease. And the list that was then circulating was not that kind of list. It was more bankers or corporate CEOs or political insiders, and I felt that just was getting more and more inappropriate. So I put my name forward, and many governments around the world came out in support of me and nominated me formally. So I was part of the running. And depending on who was announced yesterday, I was intent on going into the next phase of this if it was somebody that I thought was inappropriate. But it was an ideal nomination from my point of view. What President Obama said in nominating Dr. Kim was that it's time that the world's leading development institution be headed by a development leader. And I said, exactly right. Good news, wonderful. So I immediately withdrew my name from the nominating process and extended my support to Dr. Kim, spoke with him on the phone, communicated with the White House, and I'm delighted at how things went.
Isn't it about time that this so-called gentleman's agreement between the Europeans and the Americans over the top jobs at the IMF and the World Bank ended? Isn't it time?
Yes.
Isn't it time that this process reflected the world as it is rather than the world as it was in 1944?
Well, absolutely, and it should be an open process based on merit. I was not running as an American candidate. I was running as a candidate with world support, seeking America's support. That was the one place I didn't get the support. But I did get support in South America and Central America and West Africa, East Africa, Middle East, and Asia. But I didn't get America's support, and I was not running as an American. I don't think it's appropriate to run from a nationality point of view. I think that these are global institutions. World Bank has 187 member governments, and it should be superb international figures who are spending their lives fighting poverty, and Dr. Kim is one of those.
Okay. So let's leave that to one side. I'm sure we can come back to that. But what should the new president of the World Bank be doing then? What, if you were there and you walked into the World Bank or you were advising Dr. Kim, what 3 or 4 things would you say, these are the things you've got to really do with this institution? We've had too many bankers, as you say, too many men in suits. You've got to get on and change this organisation. What would you say would be the priorities?
Let me name 3 just as very pertinent cases. One is that during the last 10 years, thanks to a lot of leadership in this country and a lot of activism and a lot of good things happening, the disease burden in poor countries has come down significantly. About 13 million kids under the age of 5 died in 1990 of preventable and treatable diseases. Last year, though the cohort worldwide had risen significantly, the numbers who died were about 7.5 million. That's still tragically large, but you can see a lot of progress. Malaria, which is a disease I've been dealing with for the last decade, has come down by about 40%. It's possible to get malaria deaths down almost to zero. And this is one thing that I expect Dr. Kim to be a great leader on, and I am keen to work with him on that. So that's example number one. Example number two is food security. We have super high world food prices once again, and famine in many places in so-called low-income, food deficit countries. That means places where there's a lot of hunger and a lot of poor people. And the famine in the Horn of Africa, as you know, was very severe. The famine's breaking now, but the hunger is still there, and the legacy is very serious. And now there is new drought and famine and instability back in the Sahel, which is the West Africa counterpart of the drylands. In fact, I have an office, my colleagues, with several dozen professionals in Bamako. They've been holed up in their houses in the last few days because there's an ongoing coup in Mali. Now, I was in Mali last month. That's a hungry place. There was already a lot of instability. People should figure out in the Pentagon and in the intelligence agencies and so on, hunger translates to instability. You cannot fight that instability militarily. The only solution to that instability is through food security and a way out of poverty. And this is something that's possible, but the bank simply has not done it. It's not done this job for 30 years properly. And the third area I would mention is energy, renewable energy. You take a place like Mali, we've studied it extensively. Solar power, not only small-scale panels, but large-scale solar arrays, what's called concentrated solar thermal, is the low-cost energy source for a lot of that region. And with some smart programming, you could bring electricity to millions of people in a totally environmentally sound way. So those are three things I was going to start doing right away, and three things that I'm going to work with Dr. Kim to get going.
One thing that Mr. Zellick has been saying in recent years is that the crisis shouldn't lead to a drying up in aid flows from Western donors to particularly poor countries in Africa, but elsewhere in the developing world. The climate has changed substantially as a result of the financial crisis, hasn't it? I mean, you know, if you go back to 2005, when you had the Make Poverty History here as a real sort of high, the G7 met at Gleneagles, had big pledges on aid and development generally. That mood has changed, hasn't it? It's a much tougher environment out there. I mean, you've been banging the drum for aid. You've run into big arguments with people like Bill Easterly. You know, you call for a tripling of aid. He says that aid doesn't work. I mean, the climate has become both politically and intellectually tougher, hasn't it? I mean, do you think that?
I wouldn't say intellectually tougher, because the case is stronger than ever. You look at malaria. This is an area that Easterly and many others said couldn't do. And 10 years ago, I and others said, you've got to do it. I was heading a WHO commission at the time. And the malariologists knew what to do. And we've put in resources, mobilized Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, gotten tremendous progress. So no one should, who knows anything about it, fail to understand it works, and it's working. But the climate's gotten a lot tougher. Gleneagles was the apex. Making Poverty History was the high point of this campaign in terms of the overall commitments and enthusiasm. But here's an unfortunate truth. Even before the financial crisis, the Gleneagles commitments were not being met. And I used to go to the German finance ministry, for example, and they'd say, Jeffrey, you don't think we're really going to do that, do you? Unfortunately, the cynicism that exists when it comes to the lives of the world's most vulnerable people sometimes can be shocking. But when the financial crisis came, of course, everything did become much harder. What this government is doing is a great tribute to the government, but it's a great tribute to this country because you have, across the political spectrum, a commitment for decency and for honoring these commitments and this responsibility, and the world knows it and really appreciates it.
You're advising Ban Ki-moon on the Millennium Development Goals. We're now 3 years away from when those 8 goals are supposed to be met. How many of those are going to be met, you think?
In the aggregate, most of them. In fact, in the aggregate, meaning take the whole developing world and then look at a goal like cutting by half the headcount poverty rate, the proportion of the population.
That's China primarily.
That is primarily China, and it was primarily met. And it's a startling reality. It's the good news about what can happen in development. The poverty rate came from roughly 45% of the developing world population to about 22% as of 2010. This is striking, and it shows how the combination of technology, economic growth, and so forth can make huge progress. And what we see is that in all regions now, after the year 2000, not up to the year 2000, but after the year 2000, we're seeing progress, and the progress is accelerating. Africa remains the most laggard region in terms of achieving the goals. South Asia, the second most laggard region. But in both places, there is real progress, and one could accelerate that progress through the kinds of targeted strategies that are showing how effective they really are. A lot of countries will not meet the goals by 2015, but the way to achieve the goals, I think, has become more and more clear. And the idea right now, which I believe is a very good idea, is that to make as much progress as possible up to 2015, and things can be accelerated between now and then. And then with the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, to be followed by a new set of goals, which presumably will be called the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that will be adopted by the world in the next couple of years in a kind of choreography of diplomacy. And one part of those SDGs will be, in my view, the end of extreme poverty by a target date. So I think that the power of what we can do is actually stronger than we could have imagined even 5 years ago or 6 years ago. For me, the life in the poor villages where I'm working with my colleagues and with the local communities has changed phenomenally by the advent of mobile telephones, which is only 6 years old in most of these places. Now you can do things in health, in education, in business development, in emergency relief, in surveillance, disease surveillance that were unimaginable. And I was speaking to a senior telecom executive a few weeks ago. They believe, and I think it's credible, that not only will there be universal mobile coverage, which is almost there right now, but universal 3G coverage quite soon. And that will be an added notch to what we can accomplish in development, because things that you can do in public health or agronomy or education online, or effectively getting books and reading materials and teaching materials to kids and so forth, is so striking that we shouldn't lose heart at all. Of course, our problem is politics, organization, and the biggest enemy of poverty, the biggest enemy not of poverty, the biggest enemy of the fight against poverty is cynicism by far.
One thing you've been particularly associated with is the Millennium Village Project, which is investing large amounts of money into communities in sub-Saharan Africa. It's fair to say, I think, that this is not entirely without controversy in the development community. There are people who strongly oppose it, who say 3 things really. 1, it's a very top-down approach. 2, it's just throwing gazillions of dollars at a problem. And thirdly, that it's not being properly evaluated. How do you respond to those criticisms of this? Because it is one of your big ideas.
3 times wrong. Right. And look, there really are 2 kinds of people. Some are doing things, and others are sitting in their office being professional complainers. And that's what they are doing. We had one of these critics come to one of our villages recently, and she said, spectacular, really great results, but so little expensive because it's 2.5 times the national income per person. It's $370 per capita, but still great results. And then we said, excuse me, Nancy, but you had the decimal point wrong. It's $37 per capita. And she said, oh, still, well, you know, quite expensive. And this is nonsense. This is a game. This is a game of cynicism, honestly, because what's happening is at extremely low costs, one can put together a basic primary health system. One can help farmers grow more food. One can help a local community organize water and sanitation, road grading, farmer cooperatives, and so forth. And this is not throwing gazillions of dollars. This is, in the case of the Carraro, Ethiopia, about $40 per person per year. In other cases, about $60 per person per year. So for somebody to say this is expensive is absolutely just to try to throw sand in the eyes of people looking at this. So I think that the criticism is wrong, and the most important point is that governments around the region love this project and are begging for it to spread. In Nigeria, for example, a complicated country, they have taken their own budget money to scale up the concepts of the Millennium Villages to cover all of the local government areas of the country because they see that it works. So this is really the test, not what somebody sitting in an office in Washington says.
And they are being properly evaluated, are they, to see?
They are absolutely being not only properly evaluated, we will have a paper coming out in a couple of weeks in a major journal in this country of the scientifically vetted, peer-reviewed demonstration of the sharp reduction of under 5 mortality rates. And so we're very, very excited by what we're finding.
Let's broaden it out a bit. I'm sure a lot of people in this audience, a lot of Guardian readers generally, would say there's something kind of wrong about a world where there's still millions of people living in abject poverty and often dying of preventable diseases, dying of hunger. When you see the sort of excess that's been going on Wall Street. And
that's what I like about your readership.
In the City of London.
Because the Wall Street Journal readers don't necessarily say it.
So there's some sort of, economics is not just about dry GDP figures, it's about ethics, it's about morality, and something's gone seriously wrong ethically in the global economic system. Yeah?
Yeah. It's a very deep question. Why? But we've definitely lost our social bearings, at least in my country, in a very serious way. We have one of our 2 major political parties that absolutely would take away anything they could from the poor if they could get away with it. This is the purpose of the Republican Party budget. Slash the spending on health care for the poor, slash the food stamps for the poor. It's unbelievable, the vulgarity of it right now. And of course, what happened on Wall Street was itself stunning in not only the bubble and the irresponsibility, but also the lack of ethics, and I believe the massive illegality as well. Because almost every marquee Wall Street firm broke the law, as far as I can see, in peddling toxic assets knowingly to its customers, unaware, with clients unaware of what they were doing, as these companies teamed up with hedge funds to bet against the very assets that they were selling to their customers. And these big companies like Goldman Sachs are paying, and it's a different Sachs. It's as far we've never we've never found the relationship, and they've been paying large fines, Citigroup and Goldman and others, for what they've done, and it's a horrendous loss of ethical restraint. Now,
What do you do about it?
Well, you know,
in your book you say, I'm worried about my country. You say that what's going on, something has gone terribly wrong in the US economy, not just in its economics, but in its politics and society generally. And it's to say the country's cynical, people are wary, pessimistic, and so on. What's going to be done about it? Because you've had nearly 4 years of Obama, and again in your book you say that he's just really been a continuation of old policies rather than the change that he promised. Surely there couldn't have been a better moment for a president to change things. You've had the biggest bubble in America's history, followed by the biggest bust in America's history. What's gone wrong with the Obama administration?
Let me tell you one thing before we get to the politics of it. Just a recent study which I found fascinating. If somebody wants to look it up, if you have access through a university electronic library or something, is in what we call PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the U.S. A couple of months ago, published a study looking at the relationship of unethical behavior and socioeconomic status. They did 7 experiments where they ranked subjects according to their socioeconomic ranks, and then they gave them opportunities to cheat or tell the truth in various ways. And so one that was very clever was that the subject was told, you're going to spin a roulette wheel 3 times. You should add the scores and report the score, and if you get a high score, you have a chance of winning a prize. They rigged the roulette wheel so that the 3 spins always summed to 12, okay? But the subject, of course, didn't know that. So some subjects reported 15, 17, 21, of course. And then they did a ranking of what score you reported versus your socioeconomic status. The richer the person, the more the lies on the upper end.
Why are we not dying from surprise here?
I know. And this happened 7 times in 7 different experimental settings. They gave tests, asked them questions, then told them, here's a box of candy. It's for the children in the next room. Please deliver it there. You can take some, but please deliver the candy for the kids. The richer the subject, the more they kept for themselves, and the less that they delivered to the next room. And it's amazing to me, but not shocking, as you say. But it is the sociologists that did this, and the social psychologists said that it is this sense of empowerment and entitlement that is probably the best explanation. I live near Wall Street. The sense of entitlement is beyond quantification. They could not figure out why anyone might be mad at them for having nearly destroyed the world economy, taken home $30 billion a year of bonuses, gotten bailed out to the tune of another $1 trillion, then lobbied for no regulation afterwards. And what do those kids have against us? And you know what? I don't think that they were kidding, except themselves. I think that they don't get it. So that was experiment number 8. Wreck the planet. Do you accept any responsibility? No. And so this really is a very deep problem. Now, why is this? Where did this come from? Is it that when you don't exercise responsibility for 30 years, which is the Reagan and post-Reagan era? Is it if the New Democrats basically say we become the New Democrats by teaming up with Wall Street, that's how we're going to gain power? Or is it that television drove us all crazy and we saw the images of the rich and powerful and that became the model of society? I don't have a full explanation, though it's a little bit of all of those things. But I could see it in my own milieu, which is academia and top economics departments in the US, because I was at Harvard for 22 years and I've been at Columbia for 10 years. And if any of you saw the Academy Award-winning documentary called Inside Job, the 2 departments featured were Harvard and Columbia. I've seen it with my own eyes. I was off in villages while my colleagues were making a lot of money. But they all gravitated to Wall Street.
But why has Obama not done more? I mean, what you know, we are now coming to, he may well get re-elected.
Yeah.
Only because the Republicans seem incapable of putting up
Yeah.
a half-decent candidate against him.
No,
But,
because they don't define decency right now. To be a Republican leading candidate is absolutely to be inexcusably unethical in one's moral view right now, because it is absolutely to talk about how lack of compassion is a social good.
So what should Obama be doing then? If
So-
you were advising him, you're going to the country for an election in November, what should he be saying?
I do advise him, but through op-eds, and that's why I'm not World Bank president. For 4 years, I advised him, stop depending so much on Wall Street. And he's pulling back now. And I believe in the second term, he would pull back more. And he is really starting to find his voice, and he's starting to pull back from what was almost a Wall Street defined team at the beginning, and can't be if our country's going to get back to where it needs to go. He gave a very important speech a couple months ago where he went to the place where Teddy Roosevelt gave one of the famous speeches that defined the progressive movement and the progressive era in the United States a century ago. That is extremely important. And so I'm counting on President Obama to really make this breakthrough because he can do it, he needs to do it, he needs to put economic ethics and morals at the center of a strategy of national revival. It's hard because our politics are more awash in money than any other place on the planet, any other high-income democracy for sure. I won't say, you know, in proportion of the economy, but in absolute size, this election coming up this November in the United States will probably be $7 or $8 billion raised and spent. Think of the influence that is going on there. If each of the presidential candidates is raising $1 billion roughly, can you imagine? This is called democracy. And we have a Supreme Court that literally cannot tell the difference between corporate spending and free speech. And that is, you know, you've gone pretty far when the Supreme Court doesn't get it. And the Supreme Court had this horrible ruling called Citizens United, where they said that a company can give unlimited amounts to support a candidate as long as it's not directly to that candidate's campaign committee. And then the follow-up rulings have said, as equally shocking, well, the Supreme Court said that there's no taint of money, no suggestion of corruption or anything, so individuals shouldn't have any limit either. And so the money's flowing from the billionaires right now. It's unbelievable how deranged this is as a political system at the moment.
Isn't it also deranged as an economic system? Because if you look at the two big phases of the American economy since the Second World War, in the first phase, when productivity went up as it did, most people got a share in that product. They got pretty much their full share of it. So real wages went up, people earned as much as they were giving back to the economy in terms of higher productivity. And wealth was spread around. I mean, one of your heroes, John F. Kennedy, said a rising tide lifts all boats, and it did for 30 years after the Second World War. Then you had a big change, both here and in the US. I mean, here's another example of the UK. But in the second period, you saw massive rise in inequality. You saw workers not really getting a full share of their productivity gains, and the circle was squared first by, you know, governments cutting interest rates when every time, by rising asset prices and by people getting into more and more debt. Isn't there a sense in which we've reached the end of the road with that model? I mean, we've had in the States, you know, every time the stock market wobbled, Alan Greenspan waded in with a cut in interest rates and people loaded up with more debt, and one bubble was solved by creating an even bigger bubble further down the road. Haven't we reached the end of the road for that model, and shouldn't we be thinking about a new form of political economy where, you know, the goodies are spread around, where people get the full fruits of what Marx called their labour? I mean, you know, there is something kind of, it's not just a question of pumping in a bit more money in through quantitative easing or having a slightly bigger budget deficit. I mean, there is a real structural problem in Western economies there.
Well, I think there's a very deep question, and it's a deep question of analysis as well as a deep question of policy and ethics. So the question of analysis is the following. Why is it that the share of the top 1% of the population in the United States in household income rose from 10% of the total, which is high enough, by the way, to more than 20%, comparing 1980 and 2010. In other words, the share going to the very top has soared, whereas the proportion of the population living in low income has also soared. It raises some very deep and hard questions. I have my own view of that there are three things going on. One is globalization has exacerbated the inequalities by squeezing incomes of the lower skilled bottom part of the labor force. Second, corporate governance has basically, in a way, collapsed. Unions folded, global mobility of capital and deregulation meant that CEOs in the United States in particular, the UK has a bit of it, but not quite the US disease, CEOs pay themselves amounts that are beyond imagining. This is not a normal labor market. It's no labor market. The CEO appoints the compensation committee. The compensation committee thanks the CEO for the appointment. The CEO thanks the compensation committee by the annual fees for sitting on the board. Isn't that sweet? I want a job like that, you know? So that's really a collapse of corporate governance, and we have that. And there are many factors in it, but there's no countervailing pressure from unions. Financial capital has aided it and all the rest. So the CEO to average worker ratio went from about 40 times to about 400 times in the United States. It's pure ripoff. And don't tell me these people deserve it, because they're driving their companies into the ground. They're taking from the shareholders, the workers, the bondholders. There's no correlation that I can see with any merit at all. It's just if you get to pay yourself, gee, you rate yourself very well, thank you. And if you get to pay yourself from a big company, there's lots of money you can take. And that's all that's happening. And then the third factor, of course, is the politics. The rich control our politics to a huge extent. They pay for the campaigns. They get what they want in tax cuts above everything else and in deregulation. So you put this package together, it's been an amazing ride for the rich. And that's where we still are. That's why the Occupy movement was correct, why it was drawing so much attention, why it was disbanded by the police, because it was drawing too much attention, not because it was a health hazard, but it was a public relations hazard, that's for sure. And why we have not finished this story yet, and why I believe we're entering and will enter a new phase of American politics. I am not as a determinist, but I am a believer in a famous observation of Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who was one of our greatest historians, that America moves in waves of about 30 years in politics from private purpose to public purpose. We had the Gilded Age in the late 19th century. It was followed by the Progressive Era, thanks to Teddy Roosevelt. Then we swung back after World War I to the Roaring '20s and massive speculation, and our three esteemed presidents, Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover, right three near the bottom of the list, and that brought the Great Depression. Then we had, bless him for probably America's greatest president in history, Franklin Roosevelt, who came in and made a kind of second progressive era, the New Deal. And that carried us through the 1960s with the great leadership and a consensus that included Republicans like Eisenhower as well as Democrats. And then came Reagan. And Reagan made a statement on January 20th, 1981, which really was a bad statement. He said in his inaugural address, "Government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem." You had somebody like that. But
Sure did.
yeah, he proceeded with cutting the top tax rates, with deregulating finance, with the deregulating environmental control, with busting unions, and with cutting the domestic budget as a share of national income for things like job training and education. And again, this is not so unfamiliar here. And that has persisted in the United States, actually, for 30 years. And we need President Obama in his second term to lead us away from that.
But we don't seem to be getting a new progressive politics in the States, do we? We seem to be getting the Tea Party. It seems to be going in a different direction. I mean, if you're right, and we should be on the cusp of a movement towards a new, more progressive politics. I mean, you talk about the millennial generation,
Yeah.
of people who are people of digital generation, as opposed to baby boomers. That millennial generation voted for Obama, but I mean, the direction of politics in the US is not heading in what we would call a progressive left-wing direction. It seems to be heading in a very sort of angry right-wing, almost a sort of populist 1930s sort of way in parts.
The Tea Party, by the way, I think is a complete, total artificial concoction of Fox News. So I don't think it actually exists other than on Fox News, because it's the same angry 20% right that we've always had, but they gave it a name, they gave it a label, and they gave it a massive amount of PR and spin, and I don't think there's anything there, actually, other than what was always there. It's not a new movement in any sense. It's just Fox News. And I believe that we will be led back towards something different. I still hold that, and I'm going to, when I start writing my book on the history of this era, a few years from now, it'll start with President Obama's speech that was channeling Teddy Roosevelt. And that will be the start of America's new progressive
Let's
era.
hope we don't have to have another massive financial and economic crisis first.
No, we've had enough of that. I mean, I don't think we need another demonstration of this. I think it's clear enough.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask you some questions about Europe and about shock treatment in Russia, but I'm mindful of the fact that I've only got a quarter of an hour left, and I want to bring the audience in before I completely monopolise things. So I'm going to stare out here and see if I can spot some pillars. Somebody over there. I'm going to take two or three together. If you can keep them nice and short, please. There's one there. There's one there where you are. There's a man with his... Yeah, okay, I can see you there. There's one there, and there's a couple down the front when we've done those two. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yes, I'm hoping to leave today optimistic rather than deeply pessimistic, which you could do from the realities that we've been hearing about all day. So can you point, Jeffrey, to countries or leaders around the world where you have some optimism about how they can build the movement, the direction that you were just talking about?
Excellent, okay.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about China. Do you think it's going to be a malevolent or benevolent force for change in the world economy, particularly given that David Cameron wants to sell our road network to them?
Okay, good. There are a couple down here at the front which you might take. There's a gentleman there in a pale blue jumper. Oh, it was you. I was going to take you, but we'll take the two of you together. Okay.
It's been said that the good society is striking the right balance between authority on the one hand and individual freedom on the other. It's pretty obvious that we're out of balance. What three major political, economic strategies would you adopt to restore a balance that would be something that we can, in fact, have an ethical existence in.
Pass it to the man in front.
Yes, I'd like to pick up on the question you wanted to ask about shock treatment in Russia. Looking back now, how would you change your advice? What would you advise them then, which you didn't, and why?
Okay, that's a good batch of questions. I think we'll take those and we'll try and take, there's plenty of time, we can take some more. Take them in any order you like, Jeffrey. What places to be optimistic,
Yep.
China good or bad, 3 things that would make for a good society, and what would you, if you were advising Putin now or going back and advising Yeltsin back in the early 1990s, would you change anything?
Great. Let me start with the optimism and the good society part. There are deep reasons for optimism, which is that every problem that we have, environmental, health, education, and so forth, is solvable. We're not sitting with unsolvable, insoluble problems. We really aren't. Even the toughest problems in the poorest countries have good solutions. We're living through a time of the most magnificent technologies and most magnificent, better ways to do things. It's a matter of us getting organized to do this. I am, in political persuasion, a social democrat and believe that what the Scandinavian countries have is the closest we have to the good society. It is the closest we have to the balance. They spend a lot on taxes and they get a lot of social services. And they run their campaigns with candidates of all parties promising not to cut taxes because that would be tantamount to cutting the social services. And they understand that solidarity is the essence of a good society. And I really appreciate that. There's a wonderful book, if you want to read about education reform, called Finnish Lessons, about Finland's education system and how, instead of going on the teaching to the test and so forth, which is America's fad, they went on a completely different principle, which was solidarity and empowering teachers as an esteemed profession, and ended up at the top of the world's heap. And that's what I regard the social democratic idea. So even in front of our eyes, not as a theory, not as utopia, we have countries that work, that balance environment, market economy, social solidarity, very low poverty, high rights for women in the society. In other words, they do the economic, social, and environmental triple bottom line, and they do it very, very responsibly, and they do it with a lot of flexibility. And it's not, in other words, pie in the sky of a social philosopher, it's before our eyes. But in my country, I can't make anyone look at those examples because you know all the exceptions. That doesn't apply, that doesn't apply. But that's not true, because there's a lot that applies and a lot that we can learn from those experiences. So I am, by nature, an optimist. Also, as I get older and sometimes feel prone to pessimism of some sort, I feel that it is completely irresponsible and unfair for anyone of my generation to be pessimistic, because young people are optimistic, and nobody has the right to be pessimistic. We just have to be doing our job of solving the problems as best we can, and with the commitment that we can muster for this. With China, they're very good at roads, it's true.
That's a comfort to us all.
I ride on a lot of Chinese roads in Africa. They're building the Chinese road network. The African road network, and it is astounding what they can do. Just to give you one anecdote, I was coming in from Monrovia, into Monrovia from the airport in Liberia, and there was a big factory with plenty of smoke and stuff coming out, and the driver pointed out, "You see that factory? Yes, that's our asphalt factory. It's Chinese asphalt factory. It's paving all the roads." And he said, that factory went up in 30 days because the Chinese put the whole factory from China into containers, sent it to Liberia, reassembled it in 30 days, and got it going for Liberia's road construction.
no joke. They're really good at this stuff. Yeah, I understand your prime minister's idea. You know, I think the big question for us actually is, will China succumb to its own financial or political instability, or will it continue to grow and to be dynamic? I'm hoping for the latter, for the sake of China and for the sake of the world. I think the idea that somehow China tripping up would be good for the world is completely wrong. I believe that China continuing to develop is a good thing for the world. But one of the things I am very keen on doing in my UN capacity and in my personal capacity and my academic capacity is to work very hard to bring China into the multilateral sense of responsibility. China does a lot of aid right now, by the way, in Africa. It's all bilateral. It's all around resource base and other commercial interests and so on, or much of it is. It's not neo-colonialism. That's a very different category and a wrong word for it. It's commercial, and it makes perfect sense, and they're giving a lot of support, and they're doing a lot of good, by the way. But I'd like to see them be multilateral and play a part in upholding the global public goods. China, absolutely, we can't solve the global climate crisis, and it is a fulminant crisis without question until China is really leading on this. Of course, China says, what about the United States? And they're completely correct. But all of this is to say that China, its timetable was they don't want to get into world leadership things for another 30 years. They want to become rich country first, but the timing won't allow that. We got too many problems for them to wait and for us to wait.
We're running out of time, so three things?
Well, I already gave 3 things.
Okay.
3 things are Denmark, Norway, Sweden. Okay. And all the good things they do. If you want another thing, I believe unplug the television set to restore balance. And my advantage is I don't even know how to turn on our TV set because it's too many buttons. So that is very good for the mind. In shock therapy, first on jeffsachs.org, I put up an article to explain the Russia, China, Bolivia data and so on. So if people want a deeper explanation of what happened, what it's like to work in a hurricane, what it's like to work in a revolution, I tried to write that up so that people could get some sense, and people can certainly communicate with me on that. I think that I had most wonderful time advising Poland in how to move from a market economy, from a communist central planned collapse to a market economy. Things worked, and every time I turned around and asked for help from the White House, I got it. And I didn't understand. I was a little bit surprised when first Gorbachev and his team and then Yeltsin asked me, well, Poland is going well, can you help us in Russia, or in the Soviet Union, then in Russia? And I said, sure. And I came, and I knew it was going to be very hard and much bigger and much more complicated. But what I did not understand at all was that everything I would ask of the US and the G7 would be a no instead of a yes. And I really didn't get it at the time. Because for me, the end of the Soviet Union was a glorious chance for freedom and something that we should have been thrilled about. But I didn't understand Dick Cheney was in power already then. He was our Secretary of Defense. And his idea was this is the chance to cement America's unequivocal leadership in the world, which was not the point in my view. Everything I wanted, a stabilization fund for the ruble, a standstill on debt service, financial help in what was a catastrophic financial crisis, they said no to everything. So I basically had one role there at the beginning, which was Poland was an example, and it was a good example, and Poland's reforms really worked, and they started growing, and they stabilized, and many good things happened. And that was taken by Yeltsin, especially by Yegor Gaidar, his prime minister, as a kind of template. But then everything that made that possible from the outside was not done. And on the inside, there was a lot more corruption and a lot less civil society than in Poland. That was another big difference for me. I mean, basically, Russia had no civil society. It had been decimated. So there was no constraint when the corruption started. I left in 1993. I'm blamed very often for things that happened in 95, 96, 2000, 2006, 2012, 2015. But I lasted for 2 years, completely frustrated, battered, because nothing that I said had worked in the sense of no one listened, no one cared. It was really a hurricane. But the corruption levels inside and the lack of desire on the outside to actually help were the two huge realities. Okay. I don't know what you would do about that, because those were grim realities of a collapsing system. So even when you realize it, doesn't give a clear message, oh, do this. It just says, oh my God, you're in for a collapse that is really big. And they were, unfortunately.
Okay. We're really running out of time. I'm going to take two more questions if they're really, really quick. So there's somebody there, and there was somebody in the front row there. But it'll have to be really, really quick.
Could I ask what you do? Is this working? Could I ask what you do about difficult societal pressures like attitudes to homophobia and women in a country when you're looking at economic recovery programs for them? How you match those two?
Okay.
Just wondering about the balance of power in economics. We'd understood that the Chicago School economists were very influential in Russia and so forth, and they were in the ascendancy. The Keynesians were nowhere. Has that changed?
Okay. You're going to have to be really quick, Jeff.
Okay.
I'm going to get a 1 minute warning. I think I've
first, as an outsider, there's not too much you can do in some other society. I believe, from my observations in working in Africa across the continent, the women's status is changing for the better. And the idea that girls' education is important is there. The homophobia is often shocking and really stark. And so I think there's actually a difference of the two in how things are evolving right now. And but you know, these are huge questions. They're well beyond an economist's scope. But the good news I can see is that there is change, but especially around the women right now. That I think is quite dramatic, and I see it in the village level, where girls are going to school for the first time, and patriarchal fathers want their girls to go to school, and that's a fabulous, basic change. So it's really important. And then, sorry,
2 seconds, 10 seconds after, because we were.
And what was it?
It was about Chicago School and.
Oh, yeah. At the beginning, the idea was anything that was government was impossible anyway, because governments collapsed, and so the first impulse was quite a big swing. The problem has been, though, anything organized rule of law for quite a long time. And Central Europe, let me just say very briefly, Central Europe's quite different from the former Soviet Union. And there are huge variations across all of these countries that reflect their history, their geography, their economic structure. So there's no simple answers, unfortunately, to any of that.
Well, that's true of economics generally.
It is.
Simple. Right. We could go on talking for a very long time. It's been a great hour for me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed to all you for turning up. Thank you very much indeed to Jeff Sachs for being here. Let me just say, thank you very much. Let me just say that you can continue this conversation either online or on Twitter, or you can be really radical and do it face-to-face around the building. But do it whatever way you want to, because this is supposed to be a weekend where ideas are shared. So thank you very much indeed. Have a good weekend.